These are the lectures for Chapter 31 on animal organization and homeostasis. We always cover this chapter before going into the human body systems. So the focus will be on human organization. We will talk about the types of tissues. There's 4 different tissue types in the human body, which are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And we will talk about the organs, organ systems, and body cavities of the human, the integumentary system of the human, and then homeostasis in general. So we'll cover all of this information. Tissues are collections of specialized cells of the same or similar type that perform a common function. So there are 4 main tissue types, and they are epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. For epithelial tissue, it's going to cover the body surface. So it's the outside layer of your skin called the epidermis is epithelial tissue. And then it's going to line your body cavities. And epithelial tissue will also form into glands. And then the cells of epithelial tissue are packed tightly together. So they are connected to one another through tight junctions, adhesion junctions, and gap junctions. Now we're going to talk about the types of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is divided into simple or stratified. Simple epithelial tissue only has a single layer of cells. If the cells are flat, then we call it squamous epithelial tissue. If the cells are cube-shaped, we call it cuboidal. And we say simple cuboidal. And then if the cells are tall and resemble columns, we call it simple columnar. So if we have any of these cell types that there's more than one layer of them, then we call it stratified rather than simple. There is also a type of epithelial tissue called pseudostratified. It's really a single layer of cells, but under the microscope, it appears to be layers of cells because they're different shapes. Then we have glandular epithelial tissue, which is going to secrete a product. If the product is secreted into a duct, in other words, the product is not secreted into the blood, but it's secreted into a duct onto a surface, we call it exocrine glands. And if it is secreted into the bloodstream, mostly endocrine glands secrete hormones into the bloodstream, whereas exocrine glands might secrete sweat, oil. Exocrine glands might secrete digestive enzymes onto the inner surface of your intestine, of your small intestine. So here's some pictures of the different tissue types. You can look at this tissue as if you were looking down on it from above and also look at it in cross-section. So simple squamous epithelial tissue is a single layer of flat cells, and all epithelial tissue has a basement membrane underneath the cells. So it's a single layer of flat cells with a basement membrane underneath. And we find this is going to be the thinnest, most delicate tissue in the body. And we find it lining the capillaries and also lining the air sacs of the lungs called alveoli. And the purpose of it, because it is so thin and delicate, the purpose is for diffusion. For example, the air sacs of the lungs are lined by capillaries, and the air sacs and the capillaries both are composed of simple squamous tissue. So oxygen can diffuse from the air sacs into the blood, and carbon dioxide gas can diffuse from the blood into the air sacs. So that's an example of simple squamous, is we find simple squamous epithelial tissue forming the air sacs of the lungs and the blood capillaries. Then we have simple cuboidal, and those form the kidney tubules, which we call nephrons. So they're just a little thicker than the squamous cells. Then we have simple columnar, and we find simple columnar lining the intestine. And a lot of times that simple columnar at the apical surface, which is this top surface here, it will have folds in it called microvilli. So we find this lining the intestine, and for the function of it is for absorption of nutrients across the lining of the intestine into the blood. And then we have pseudostratified columnar, which this is called pseudostratified ciliated columnar because the surface is composed of cilia. And that cilia will sweep mucus and trapped pathogens and debris up and out of your airways. So we find pseudostratified ciliated columnar tissue lining the trachea, and that's the purpose of it, is to sweep impurities toward your throat so you can, I know it sounds gross, but so you can cough it up and it doesn't get deep into your lungs. And then we have stratified squamous tissue. So this is layers and layers of flat cells, and this tissue forms the epidermis of the skin. Also lines openings, so lines your mouth, your esophagus, anal canal, and vagina. There's a little bit on endocrine and exocrine glands, and then connective tissue. This slide is going to show you for connective tissue. This particular slide is showing an illustration of what we call areolar connective tissue, which is a type of loose connective tissue. It has all the fibers and all the cells in it, all the different cells that you can have in connective tissue and all the different protein fibers. So these cells up here at the top left are fat cells, adipose cells. And then this cell in the middle here is a fibroblast. And what it does is it produces other types of cells, and it also produces the fibers, the connective tissue fibers. The thick fibers are called collagen. Okay, I would almost like re-record this because I can't believe that I just made that mistake. But this is a blood vessel, not collagen. The thick fibers are called collagen fibers. Here's a collagen fiber. And the very, very thin fibers that are elastic and stretchy are elastic fibers. And then you have these thin fibers that are branching and they form a network. They are reticular fibers. So we have collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers. Collagen fibers and elastic fibers are more common in connective tissue. Reticular fibers are going to be found in organs that are solid all the way through and kind of like mushy. So if you think about the liver, if you cut through the liver, it doesn't have any space in it. It's just a solid, mushy kind of tissue. And the spleen is the same way. So there's lots of reticular fibers in the liver and the spleen. All right, we also see a cell here called a white blood cell, which functions in defense, and then a stem cell that can divide and produce other cells. Then this loose connective tissue called areolar tissue also is filled with ground substance, and the ground substance is kind of syrupy, like maple syrup. So that's one type of connective tissue, but we're going to talk about different ones. All connective tissue has in common three things: specialized cells, ground substance, and protein fibers. So it may not have all of the specialized cells, and it may not have all the protein fibers. And for example, blood is a connective tissue. It's a fluid connective tissue. So is lymph. And neither one of the fluid connective tissues has protein fibers. It only has cells and ground substance. But when you add the ground substance and the protein fibers together, we call that the matrix. The matrix of connective tissue surrounds the cells of connective tissue. So if you compare epithelial and connective tissue, the epithelial tissue doesn't have a lot of, all it is mainly is cells that are packed tightly together. But connective tissue, although it has specialized cells, they are separated by the matrix. So, and we're going to learn 3 categories of connective tissue. They are fibrous, supportive, and fluid. And the last 2 are real easy. The fluid connective tissue is blood and lymphatic fluid, and the supportive is bone and cartilage. So it's the fibrous connective tissue that you may not have heard of before. There is basically 3 different types. There's loose fibrous connective tissue, which is also known as areolar tissue. And this is a microscopic photograph of the same tissue we just looked at that we saw here on slide 10. Then you have adipose tissue, which is another type of loose connective tissue, but it's just mostly made of cells filled with fat. These are all adipocytes or fat cells. And then we have dense fibrous connective tissue that there's a type of dense fibrous connective tissue that forms, that's found in the dermis of the skin, and then also tendons and ligaments. So tendons connect muscles to bone and ligaments to connect bone to bone, and they are composed of dense fibrous connective tissue. Then we have cartilage and bone, which is our supportive connective tissue. This one image is hyaline cartilage that you see here in blue surrounding the end of your upper arm bone called the humerus, and it is protecting the end of that bone so that it won't so that it won't rub against the scapula or shoulder blade, which is what it's connected to. So we have hyaline cartilage at the ends of our bones, including our ribs. Then we have compact bone forming the shaft of a long bone. And then there's spongy bone that forms the ends of long bone. But cartilage and bone are our 2 supportive connective tissues. Now here are the notes on the fibrous connective tissue. The cells are called fibroblasts, and the matrix is jelly-like, and it contains collagen and elastic fibers. There's loose fibrous connective tissue, which surrounds organs and allows them to expand, supports epithelial tissue. So a lot of times you'll have epithelial tissue, and then underneath it there will be loose fibrous connective tissue, and it forms a protective covering over many of our organs. Then we have adipose or fat tissue, which stores energy, provides insulation, and most of the adipose tissue is white, but newborns have brown fat, which is due to the increased numbers of mitochondria. And another thing, you have to Google this because I don't know a lot about it, but sumo wrestlers also they have a lot of fat, but their fat is typically brown fat, and they train in order to build up that brown fat. So it's interesting to read about. But other than sumo wrestlers, we do find brown fat in newborns. Then our dense fibrous connective tissue is also found in the skin, but it's found under the epidermis, in the dermis, and also it forms tendons and ligaments. Cartilage and bone are our supportive connective tissue. Cartilage does not have a direct blood supply, so for that reason, it heals very slowly. The cells of cartilage lie in small chambers called lacunae, and then they're surrounded by matrix. Bone is it does have a lot of, it doesn't say it here, but it does have a blood supply. So bone has a blood supply, and so it's able to heal a lot faster than cartilage. Bone cells are also located in lacunae, and then the lacunae are surrounded by the matrix, which is composed of calcium salts and protein fibers called collagen. There are three types of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is found in the nose and the ends of long bones and ribs. Elastic cartilage forms the outer ear. Fibrocartilage is found in the intervertebral disc. Bone, the matrix of bone, like I said, is mostly calcium salt deposited around collagen fibers. And then there's two types of bone. There's compact and spongy. The compact bone is found in the shaft of a long bone, like your arm and leg bones. And it's made of these units of bone tissue called osteons. Spongy bone is found in the ends of long bone, and then all your other bones, like your skull bones, will contain spongy bone. And spongy bone, in the air spaces, instead of air, there's red bone marrow, and red bone marrow produces our blood cells. So that's found in the spongy bone. Then our fluid connective tissue is blood and lymph. Neither of these have protein fibers at all. Blood has red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and then the matrix is called plasma. Lymph is a fluid connective tissue that we find in lymphatic vessels. Here's a picture showing you the red blood cells, the platelets, which are just fragments of cells, and then the white blood cells are the larger cells here that are stained purple. And we will start with muscular tissue in the next recording.